Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this session and welcome to the HPC technology session. We have two speakers. Our first speaker will be Bin Cho from Huawei, and he will be speaking about or sharing with us on a topic, diversified computing power for pervasive intelligence. And our second speaker will be from Dell. His name is Adnan Khalil, and he will be talking with us on artificial techniques in pharmaceuticals and drug discovery. Over to you, Dr. Bin Cho.
Hello.
Hi, you can start your presentation.
Okay, so I'm sharing. And hello, everybody. I'm very honored to participate in this meeting. And so today I'm going to talk about diversified computing power for pervasive intelligence. So currently I'm the CTO of Accent computing business at Huawei. And here is the short bio of myself. And I got several degrees from different universities, and I worked with a lot of companies in computing area. And currently, I'm also a professor. So today, I'm going to first introduce Huawei to everybody. And probably you know about Huawei. And Huawei is a leading global provider of ITC infrastructure and smart devices. And our goal is to bring digital to every person, home, and organization for a fully connected, intelligent world. And we have a lot of employees, and half of them are R&D. And we have witnessed over 170 countries and regions in the world. Currently, we ranked number 61 in Fortune Global 500. So Huawei is providing infrastructure, especially computing infrastructure, for all our partners and customers. And we all know AI currently is a new trend. And in this area, we know that AI has become a new GPT, which means a general purpose technology, and it will drive social development profoundly. Currently, we see different weave of the transaction of computing power. And we all know that AI industry will get bigger and bigger. And with more and more AI applications, and we can see a lot of improvements in different areas. And we know the computing power has changed a lot. And the intelligent devices expand to various industries. And it is driving pervasive computing. In the past, we know that computers used to be very huge and big. But however, currently, intelligent devices are becoming smaller, and heterogeneous computing is the new trend. And even with your cell phone, it has huge computing power with it. And so we can say that computing is everywhere around us. But how to use them smartly and how to use AI to accelerate computing is a big problem right now. And we all know that AI has made a lot of breakthroughs. And the AI algorithms, together with the big data and with computing power, is creating new abilities. For example, our image classification, or speech recognition, or game playing, or even NLP. Those abilities used to be sort of the only ability that human can do. Currently, AI models has exceed human capabilities in those areas. And with more and more development, we are seeing more and more applications that can be better than even human. So we see that with more and more data and more computing, we get more and more intelligence, because the explosive data growth and the pervasive computing requirement requires intelligence to process them. We know that by the year of 2025, we will generate over 180 zettabytes data. And also we will have over 150 billion connected devices connect to our network. And over 80% of those new generated data and devices will require AI processing power. As we know, AI is the next exascale HPC computing. So we see a big trend. We see a big trend that HPC and AI are converging from system to applications. As we all know, the currently top 500, the number one ranked in top 500 is Fugaku. And this supercomputer has the capability of providing AI processing powers. And also the number two has AI computing power too. And among the 6 applications that were shortlisted in the Golden Bell finalist in 2018, half of them are examples of using HPC and AI together. For example, we see that deep learning can help to do climate analysis. And also we see that deep learning is working in other areas. For example, electronic microscope image analysis. And those abilities is pushing HPC and AI merging together. So let me show you some examples of how we are using HPC plus AI to solve the problems dramatically. And probably you got the news today that DeepMind is using AI to do this protein folding. And this protein folding used to be a very hard problem to solve for HPC problems. But currently, by using AI, it's been solved. And also in many other areas. For example, in the global weather forecasting, and also the dynamics of the Earth. And we see that AI is playing very well in those areas, especially in the area that related to object detection or classification. And also AI plus HPC have been applied to multiple domains. For example, in medical research, as we got this new exciting news that AI is helping to do a protein folding things and to predict the structure of the molecules. And those will dramatically help the drug discovery. And also, we are using AI to do astronomical signal processing in real-time fashion. And we are combining AI and HPC, and we see different trends. And we see 3 major patterns in this area. The first pattern is that we are using AI algorithms to finish the traditional HPC applications or problems. For example, we are using DeepLab v3 or ResNet, those kind of AI models to work to replace the traditional algorithms. And we also see the trends that we are using AI computing power to solve the traditional HPC problems. For example, we can solve the equations or the linear systems by leveraging the AI computing power like FP16. This precision is specially designed for AI, but we can see that we can also benefit from those low precision or high precision calculation. And those kind of AI computing merging with HPC will dramatically change HPC field. And also, we can see that AI will work together with HPC because even some traditional HPC problems, AI will have to work together with those algorithms. And let's see some examples. For example, the physical simulation. And by replacing the HPC algorithms with AI algorithms, we get the same results or even better results, but with very fast processing time. And the AI models can simulate, can approach the traditional HPC solutions. And at Huawei, we provide this converged computing platform for the intelligent transformation. For example, at low level, we provide heterogeneous computing platform. We have Atlas 500 for edge computing, and we also have a lot of servers. For example, we have AI training servers and AI inference servers, and we have AI clusters, super strong clusters. For example, Atlas 900, and this is the fastest AI cluster in the world. And also, because we need to converge the traditional computing pattern together with AI, and we provide heterogeneous computing architecture called CAN. It's a computing architecture for neural network, but it also supports traditional computing. And also, we provide AI framework. It's an open source AI framework called Mandible. And we need to use AI, so we provide the tool set and all the maintenance capabilities. And also, we have this developer zone. And by providing this full stack solutions, and we can easily combine AI together with HPC systems. So that's what we see. And we are using AI to transform the traditional HPC area. Okay, let me show you some examples we have here. And for example, this SKA square kilometer array, we are using AI to processing the classification of the stars. And usually it costs an expert over 169 days to classify those stars. But by using our AI algorithms together with Atlas heterogeneous computing platform, we finish this application within 10 seconds. And so you can see that by leveraging AI plus HPC, we can do so many amazing things. And thank you so much for listening, and hope we bring AI and HPC together, and we will create a strong heterogeneous computing platform for you, for everybody, for our partners. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bintro. We still have time for questions. The next section will start at 2:30. So we got 15 minutes until the next session. Please wait.
Okay, great.
For questions.
So should I stop the sharing, or I'll keep with it?
You can stop the sharing if you wish to. I can read the questions for you. If somebody posts a question on the Q&A chat, you can also see the question yourself and read it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
you saw the question.
Yeah, I saw the question.
Okay.
It's about more about the SKA examples, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So we know that square kilometer array is the biggest telescope imaging systems in the world, and so it will generate a huge data of a huge amount of data of the sky, the stars, all kinds of different galaxies and stars, and so we will need to label them or tag them. For example, it's different types of stars or galaxies. However, uh, usually it will require very expertise and very well-trained experts to do those kind of classification. We need to classify, or we need to detect different type of stars. And we know that it's a huge work. And so we are using these deep learning models. We train a deep learning model, and we are using ResNet 50 as the baseline model. And we slide through the sky using this model to detect different types of stars. And we splitting those tasks, the whole image of the sky, we're splitting them into like more than 1,000 nodes. And since it's all decoupled and separated, so it will be processed by each part will be processed by an AI processor. And this AI processor will detect and classify which type of stars it belongs to. And so by doing this, we can finish the task very quickly because the AI models can be processed in no time. So we processed over 100 gigabytes of images of the sky data, and it cost the clusters only in like 10 seconds. Yeah, so thank you for the question. And I think AI is changing a lot of things. especially in traditional HPC and supercomputing field. And this amazing news of using AI to do protein folding from DeepMind, this is spectacular. And this will dramatically change a lot of things because it used to be very costly to do protein folding. And we're using a lot of different measures and it could cost a lot of computing resources. However, AI will do that easily. And also AI consumes less. And so we strongly think that by combining or converging AI and HPC, and we can solve a lot of problems better and faster and efficiently. Okay, so Melanie,
Please note if you have any more questions for Bincho, you've got 5 minutes until the next session. Our next session will start at at 2:30 from Adnan. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. He's from Dell.
That's correct. Yes.
He was speaking about artificial techniques in pharmaceuticals and drug discovery. Thank you, Adnan.
Sure.
Oh, even with Cho, was I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes, you are. You are. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no more questions for Dr. Bincho, please, Anand, you can start when you're ready.
All right. Okay. So I'm sharing my screen. I'm assuming you can see it, correct?
Correct.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining my session. My name is Adnan Khalil. I'm part of the global HPC team at Dell Technologies. I'm based here in Austin, Texas. It's my absolute pleasure to be joining you today. I wish I could be there in person, but this is the second best and And hopefully next year, I have an opportunity to come visit all of you in person. So today I'll be telling you more about artificial intelligence applications in pharmaceuticals and drug discovery. And as part of our mandate at Dell Technologies is to develop more AI-specific technologies, and I wanted to share a bit of some of the work that we do in terms of coming up with the solutions and working with some of our other customers in that space. I thought it'd be interesting. So it literally is the race to save lives, and nothing more motivates me than listening to why there is so much opportunity. And I don't say opportunity in an economic sense, but the opportunity to improve the lives of the underprivileged people who may be struck with particular ailments. And it's a sad fact that only a third of the estimated 20 to 30,000 known diseases have an adequate treatment. And even as of 2017, and this number has only grown sort of minutely since 2017, the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, has approved only about 1578 drugs in total. And that roughly targets, just less than 1/20th of the number of disease-related molecular targets in the 20 to 25,000 genes composing the human genome. So you can see, there's a lot of work left to be done. There's a lot of lives to be saved. And some of the techniques, all of the low-hanging fruit in this space have been, we've managed to find all of the easy drugs, and all of the compound difficult drugs now is what's taking a lot of time. And the hope and the goal is that we can use artificial intelligence to speed this drug discovery process or the drug repurposing process. And I'll be talking about some of the techniques that have worked successfully in the next few slides. All right, just a bit about myself. I've been part of the high performance computing I've been part of the high performance computing space for over 2 decades now. In fact, my background is in high performance computing, and I was working on neural networks a long time, even before they became a buzzword in 2012, like a little over 8 years ago. And I've got a patent and several papers that I've published on computer systems. But it's really, I'm really motivated by looking for better solutions, working with our customers, and then trying to democratize the process. Because a lot of the times, the big pharma companies are the ones that are developing these cutting edge solutions. But my goal is to take some of their techniques, based on like open data, open research, create architectures, and then make them available to as many folks as possible. So to that end, today's discussion is going to focus on mostly, it's broken down into 2 parts, although I'm going to be focusing mostly on the first part, which is the science. Now, in the science, this is the really interesting part, why AI for drug discovery, and the different types of AI techniques used in pharmacological drug discovery today, and some of those use cases. I'm really not going to go into scaling, but just so that you have an idea, those are the types of problems that keep myself and some of my colleagues up at night as we try to create solutions that not only work well at a small scale, but are modular, and they scale much larger systems. So, but that's really a part of an extended topic. I will just touch upon them very briefly, but we're really going to focus on the science today. All right. So when it comes to AI and healthcare, there's lots and lots of different applications. And I just wanted to present this one slide, which gives you an idea of the breadth of different use cases within the healthcare space. Right from looking for medical claim fraud detection to early cancer detection and oncology and image diagnostics and so on and so forth. There's lots and lots of areas where AI can be applied and has been applied. Unfortunately, today, we only have time to talk about one of those things, which is the drug discovery process. Okay, so I think it behooves us to better understand what does the process involve? Because it is a very lengthy process. It includes of 4 different stages, and it can take quite a lot of time, anywhere from 10 to 15 years to find a particular target molecule that affects a particular, that can be used as a treatment for a particular disease or a malady, and then have it go through the different stages. So the first stage is the R&D, the research and development, which can take anywhere from 3 to 6 years. I'll be talking about more of those in a moment. The preclinical studies, you do in vitro and in vivo studies. This is where you're actually doing some of the animal model studies as well as the animal studies. Then you've got the clinical trials, which is the human trials, and you do that in 3 phases. So there's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then lastly the reviews and the approvals. And you can see if you add all of those numbers, even at the lower end, you're talking about like at least 10 years, right? On the upper side, it's 15 years or more. So when you're doing the R&D, what you're typically trying to do is do target identification. In other words, look at the various drugs, the drug molecules, and see which of those targets they will affect. I have another slide where I talk about the lock and the key analogy that's typically used in the drug discovery process to give you a better idea of, what exactly do I mean by, the target identification. And as a result of target identification and going through all of the known compounds, typically you sort of whittle that down to 10,000 plus compounds. And again, with some more screening after that, you then identify a few leads, which is typically around 250 or so. Now, once you've done that, you get into the next stage, which is the preclinical studies. And in the in vitro studies, which is in glass, this is where you're trying to do it in a laboratory, completely in test tubes or things of that sort. Again, not looking at animal models, but just trying to understand better some of the interactions of these compounds that you've identified as leads, and looking at how they affect the cells. Again, you have to have that macro view before you can get into the micro view. And then once you're sufficiently satisfied or narrowed it down even further in the in vitro studies, then you do the in vivo studies. So that is where you are looking at animal models and maybe other animals other than human testing before you do that. And again, the minimum required standard for this thing is you have to do it on at least 2 mammalian species before you can even approach human testing. And then you've got clinical trials, which is where a lot of the drugs fail. In fact, a lot of the drugs fail even before they approach the phase 1 trials. And usually you have to have a sample set of anywhere from 20 to 80 individuals for the phase 1. For the phase 2, you've got 100 to 300, and phase 3, which is the most extensive, usually that's up to 3,000 people. So as you can see, all of this is a very involved process. There's lots and lots of moving parts, but there's lots of places to fail as well. And a lot of the times, the compounds fail because they are either too toxic or they affect too many other targets in the system other than what they were designed for. So there's lots of things to be tested and to make sure that not only is the drug efficacious, but it's also non-toxic on the host. All right. So when it comes to the case for AI and drug discovery, it sort of falls into 2 buckets. And this is a build-out slide, but I'm just going to go through this again really quickly. So it falls into 2 buckets. One is cost, the other is complexity, right? So when you're talking about the cost, there's a $1 trillion global pharmaceutical industry that's been in steady decline for the past 2 decades. And the amount of money that's being returned on every dollar invested has drastically dropped 5-fold from 10 cents 10 years ago to now less than 2 cents per dollar. And pharmaceutical companies are spending more and more. The top 10 ones spend $80 billion a year to come up with fewer and fewer successful drugs. And according to one particular study, it cost anywhere from $2.6 billion plus to develop a particular treatment. So you can see why it's really expensive, and it's also really complex, all right? And as I mentioned earlier, it can take a really long time to bring a drug to market. So on the other hand, on the other bucket, the complexity, it usually takes 5 to 6 years from the start of the stage 1 to the end of the preclinical testing. 10,000 molecules I talked about earlier. 10 are selected for, the clinical trials. And the success of a compound entering phase 1 trials is slightly under 10% and has not increased in decades. So anything we can do to increase that success rate is going to smoothen the process and hasten it. And again, a lot of very few drugs approved in 2018 were biologics. In other words, these were complex molecules that are very, very specific to a particular disease-causing mechanism. And here's the big kicker, right? So typically a molecule that interacts with one target protein also interacts with 300 other proteins in the body. So you have to make sure that, that a particular molecule that you're doing is safe at multiple different levels. And machines can help us all along the way. Now, there's been a lot of success. There's been, a company called In Silico Medicine that developed a lead compound against fibrosis in 46 days using a de novo small molecule. And I'll talk about the process that they use there. And again, lots of companies have had, early stage companies have had success. But, the caveat is only a few of the AI drug discovery companies have actually started human testing, and none has begun phase 3 trials as yet. Okay, so with that, I'm going to skip this particular slide, but these are the different techniques that we use in the AI process. But roughly speaking, there are 3 different methods: statistical, deep learning, and simulation, which are all really exciting. A quick primer on the different AI techniques in use. The first one is clustering. So if you've got a scatter chart and you want to break it into 2 different clusters, there's lots of automated machine learning algorithms, k-means being one of them. That allows you to break it into different cohorts, different populations based on some criteria. Usually it's like, nearest neighbor or some kind of, a distance-based algorithm. And machines are particularly good at doing that, as you can see in the bottom chart, where you've got, a rather non-homogeneous distribution of data points, and you want to break it into sort of, different sort of either consumer groups or cohorts or things like that. Okay, this is one of the more popular techniques used in AI and drug discovery. The next one is the image recognition, which I'm sure a lot of the audience is familiar with, the deep learning model, where you train a neural network with lots of labeled data, and then you can use the model to inference. So for example, if you train the model with lots of images of, humans and strawberries and bicycles, and then you present a properly trained model in the inference stage with a picture of a bicycle, it should be able to identify it correctly, right? And then we've got what I call adversarial networks, and this is what's being used in molecule synthesis. Now, a GAN is nothing but 2 deep neural networks that are competing with each other. And the way this kind of works is really quite interesting, and it's really smart. So, you've got one neural network that's tasked with generating a fake, and the other one with identifying a fake. And, the difference that the discriminator uses is then used to sort of train the other neural network to produce a better image, or a better model or a better molecule. So what you see in the bottom diagram there is the generated data and the real data. The generated data is from the first neural network, and the discriminator is comparing that with the real data. And you can see over multiple steps, discriminator is telling the generator that its models of a dollar bill are not realistic enough, and and the generator goes through these multiple iterations where it's trying to produce the elements of a dollar bill in succession. If everything goes well and you've got the right parameters, you should end up with something very much like a real dollar bill, but it's completely generated, and it's not created from an image, right? And then the last one is the reinforcement learning, which is where you set a neural network in some sort of either a real or a simulated environment, and it's allowed to, given some degrees of freedom where it can make some actions, and then it can look at the effect it had in the environment, if it's positive or negative, and use that as a reinforcement feedback technique. A lot of people have trained various video games to be played by neural networks and done it quite successfully using this technique. All right, so now we're going to get into the lock and key analogy and some of the other techniques, and you can see that typically what you're trying to do is a drug is a key, and the target, which is typically some protein within a disease-causing a molecule on, say, a virus or a bacterium, is what you're trying to target. Now, typically, the grand challenge for AI falls into 5 different categories. You're finding new locks for new doors. You're already testing the available set of keys that you may have come up with in the past. You're trying to design the perfect key so that it only works on a particular target, and or in some cases, you might be optimizing the structure of the available key with a good fit, so you're making a better key. And in some cases, you might be looking at alternative drugs that both target the same molecule in the host. All right. So broadly speaking, there's 5 different techniques that are utilized. One is automated image and video analysis of drugs, and again, using deep neural networks. Then there's automated literature review. This is really relying on natural language processing, or NLP, and knowledge graphs and graph databases. And they're going through and scouring through all of the available literature and creating more compact representations of that knowledge, so you can search and find some of the interactions between drugs and genes and molecules easier. Then there's the third approach, which is drug optimization and repurposing. Then the last 2 are the preclinical testing AI, which can help identify more accurate animal models for certain diseases. And then lastly, but not least, is the exhaustive correlation between compounds and healthy and non-healthy cells. And that's what you show in this diagram. And essentially, just to walk you through that really quickly, is you may have a set of different compounds, and you can sort of use automated techniques based on their interactions with various biological models that have been done previously to sift through and approximate how a new target molecule or a new target is going to react to those molecules. And again, you can do this in a completely automated fashion based on some of those techniques that I mentioned earlier. And you can do this rather quickly. So essentially what you're trying to do is, without even getting to in vitro studies, you're trying to do an exhaustive search of which compounds can you use to help you narrow down which drugs could be effective. All right, so one of the first techniques, and I find this really interesting, is using video analysis. Now in this particular case, a pharmaceutical company has a lot of Drosophila, which are the fruit flies that we're all familiar with, and they're trying to understand how the various neural structures contribute to its locomotion. In other words, how does it move its particular legs? Which regions of its brain are activated when it moves or it does certain things. And the way you typically do this is you make some small sort of a genetic change in its brain, and then you record lots and lots of video of it, and you analyze the video. In the past, this was done completely using humans and lots of grad students and research assistants, and it took a lot of time. But guess what? It turns out that deep learning is really good at analyzing this particular effect. So what you can do is we can analyze lots and lots of videos of Drosophila, each one of them that has been given a particular sort of a genetic disorder, so we can then identify what that particular brain region does. So, and there's a lot of automatic correlation of that. Just to give you an idea of the amount of video that, was needed in this particular study. Around 500 terabytes of video, over 400,000 files was done using machine learning algorithms. Again, imagine trying to do that at a human scale, and then it becomes an intractable process very quickly. Now, protein folding has been one of those classical HPC problems, and you've got very large computer systems that have been thrown at this particular problem, and even so, it's a very, very difficult problem. And machine learning is coming to our aid over there. Just to give you an idea, a protein is made up of there are long chains of and sequences of amino acids bonded together, but in nature, in order for the protein to work, it has to be in a particular shape. Now, in nature, these proteins, based on either the temperature or the environment that they're in, naturally assume a particular shape, which enables them to do their work. But in order for us to understand what that shape is, it's really hard for us to see that particular shape, either using microscopes or other techniques, because they end up either corrupting that environment where the protein is denatured and loses its shape, and we don't know what its natural shape looks like. Now, deep learning has been used to significantly aid the protein folding process by parameterizing the how molecules interact. So in this particular use case, AlphaFold, which is a deep learning company based in the UK, parameterized the distance between two pairs of amino acids, and they did this for billions and billions of molecules, and how they align themselves in other proteins, and use that as a way of predicting how they might be in another long sequence of amino acids. And using that technique, they've been really successful. In fact, by far, they've been the most successful technique in terms of protein folding, and they've been able to hasten the process, several orders of magnitude, to the point where it was just announced in the news yesterday, and there is this conference called the CASP, which is a critical assessment of techniques for protein structure prediction, and they've improved upon the techniques that were first introduced last year, and now they're saying that this is a significantly simpler problem to solve, and they're going to move on from simple, single sequence amino acids to multi amino acids, and so on. So again, there's lots of work to be done here, but deep learning is coming to the rescue. Now, I think I'm almost out of time, but I'm going to just go through the last few slides very, very quickly. Now this particular use case is really interesting to me because we discovered an antibiotic completely using AI, and the way they did this is they essentially identified a particular bacteria, Escherichia, I'm mispronouncing that, but Escherichia coli, and they looked at all of the molecules, either they be synthetic molecules or natural molecules or known antibiotics, and they fed all of those interactions into a computer model, essentially how and what these different molecules were affecting the growth of this particular pathogen. All right, so that's the model creation. That's the first step. So you've taken all of these interactions and you've created a machine learning model from that. Now, in the drug creation step, they asked the model to then use all of 6,000 molecules that are part of a drug repurposing hub, which is a knowledge database. And they are, based on what it learned from this Escherichia coli pathogen, they then asked the computer model to use a database of an additional database of 6,000 molecules and test which one of them would be effective against a different sort of a pathogen. In this case, they used the E. coli, which we're all familiar with as for corrupting food sources and all kinds of other problems that E. coli has. And then, they asked them to narrow it down by only the molecules that look different from conventional antibiotics. All right. Now, again, that was a key thing. And, when they set out to do this, they didn't think they'd come up with anything interesting, but actually they did. So, the machine learning model came up with 100 candidates for physical testing. And one of them turned out to be really unique. And it was actually a molecule that was already being investigated for diabetes treatment, and it turned out to be a potent antibiotic. Now, so here, this is where, the power of machine learning lies, is that it can take a particular molecule that's already being studied, and in some cases, it may even be approved as a drug for something else, in which case you can repurpose it, and you don't have to go through all of the FDA testing, and you can, use it and bring it to market really quickly. But in this particular case, this molecule turned out to be a potent antibiotic. And what was really interesting is it used a mechanism that didn't rely on the traditional mode of operation for any sort of an antibiotic. In fact, it turned out that it was disrupting the flow of protons across the cell membrane of the bacterium, in which case it was disrupting how the cell worked and operated. And as a result of disrupting that proton flow, the cell died. Right? And the best part is that due to the nature of how this drug was working, the pathogen failed to develop, resistance even after 30 days. That's, many millions of generations. Whereas in other antibiotic compounds, typically resistance develops in 1 or 2 days. Okay. I think we've got a couple of more slides. I think I'm probably at the bottom of my time, but the last two techniques over here, AI molecule design. This is an application of general adversarial networks, the GANs, where you've got two competing models, and it's being used all the time in molecule synthesis. This I thought was particularly interesting because you're trying to target, a particular molecule. And the different steps that you have to go through, again, it's straightforward. It's not particularly simple, but it is straightforward. So, so the basis for this, for example, if you're trying to target a particular virus, is that when a virus fuses with a cell, certain genetic material is released in the form of viral DNA. Now, the way viruses work is that they hijack your own cell and they create the viral proteins that are then replicated, millions and millions of times, which then go and infect other good cells. Now, if there is a particular protein that's involved in this viral replication process, you can target it. And typically there is one or a few, and that's the main protease. And the main protease is responsible for creating those functional proteins that are then needed to assemble more copies of this virus. So, but if you can find a drug that targets that main protease, then you're in business, because now you've effectively stopped that virus from replicating. So in this particular model, in this particular sort of process, what you're trying to do is you're trying to use an AI model that will learn how to create a particular drug. In this case, it's called a ligand molecule that will target that main protease. And then you build a generative model that is trained, which is from a trained neural network, and you train it on developing molecule synthesis to design new molecules that are based on the characteristics of the main protease of that virus. And then ultimately, you have to have some kind of a test, to make sure that it is actually binding to that main protease and so on and so forth. But that is the process that's being used. And in fact, one of the drugs being considered for COVID-19 has been sort of developed using this technique. And, again, it's going through a lot of critical assessment and trials right now. High content screening. I'm going to skip this one, but this is one of the fascinating techniques where you're using video analysis to identify, different phenotypes, which is essentially small changes in the cell structure or various other characteristics of the cell based on some perturbations that you've introduced. Again, you can use a lot of video analytics techniques that I mentioned in my first slide. And then lastly, what I do want to talk about is knowledge graphs. Now, this is particularly interesting to me because it's really based on creating an ontology from existing literature. And ontology is nothing but a mapping of different aspects of knowledge. So for example, if you've got a gene that you see in the bottom left-hand diagram there, you can then list various attributes that are associated with that particular gene. For example, the biological process, its molecular function, the pathways, compounds, so on and so forth. So if you do this for all of the genes and all of the diseases and all of the drugs that you have knowledge on and people have studied, well, you create this really massive database. And typically these are done in graph database. So then what you can do is you can find which drugs that are already known are targeting the pathways that you understand and have drugs approved for them, and see if there are any other drugs or any other diseases that the same pathways might be affected. Now, in a study done at the Institute of System Biology in Seattle, again, this was many years ago, they found a drug that had already been approved for HIV treatment based on its chemical activation pathway. And it worked in such a way that could also be utilized for a particular type of breast cancer. So you can see, this really sped up that research there, because all they were doing is they were looking at existing literature to come up with a short list of some of the drugs. Now, I did finish most of the science that I wanted to get to. Apologize, I'm a bit over time. And I'm really not going to talk about the scaling, but I did want to open it up to questions that the audience may have. And just so that you have an idea, the scaling is more about the machine architectures that we put into place, and then we work with our customers. And I don't, even though that's what keeps up my colleagues at night, I think the science is the more interesting part in this particular talk. So. And again, if you do have any questions, you can either put it in the chat box or you can put it in the Q&A. I'd be happy to talk more about them.
Thank you, Anand. We'll wait for the questions. So far, there is none. I would like to announce that the next session by Microsoft has been cancelled. The session that is will start at 3:15 has been cancelled, and the only session that will follow after lunch, after tea break, will be at 15:45. There is a question for you, Anand, from...
Yeah. Colin Lang. Hey, hi, Colin. Yeah, so it is being used in the development of COVID-19 vaccines. And in fact, some of the techniques that they used are actually based on, what I talked about earlier, is designing molecules that latch on to the spikes in the COVID-19 virus. And they've used molecule synthesis. Although the Moderna and the Pfizer and even the Oxford drugs that are in phase 3 clinical trials and have received very good marks in terms of effectiveness, those have relied more on the traditional techniques which we had already well understood. But to answer your question, yes, they are looking at other molecule synthesis tools in order to latch on to those spikes of the COVID-19 virus. Any other questions? All right, so if there are no more questions, then I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up. Oh, there's one more question just popped in from Danielle. If leads are discovered and they seem in theory to be effective, could this fast track the clinical trials? And there's one more question from Jonathan. I'll come to that in a moment. But yeah, so Daniel, to come to your question, yes. So when you do find a drug that is at least based on the machine analysis is effective. So what that does is usually they filter out drugs based on known toxicities and things of that sort. So remember, if we go back, let's go back to the whole process. A lot of the drugs fail in the phase 1 clinical trials because, they are toxic to people, or, maybe one study had found out it was toxic, but then this particular research or this particular group didn't have access to that data, and so they ended up like sort of not using that information. Now again, with global databases and people sharing that data, the goal is to eliminate a toxic molecule as early in the process as possible, right? But in theory, and again, even that gentle, which is that a drug produced from in silico laboratories for fibrosis. That's essentially what it did. They were able to use a drug that in theory didn't have any sort of, or minimal amounts of interactions with other biological processes in people, and that's how they got into their phase 1 trials in 46 days instead of multiple years that it took. I hope that answers your question, Daniel. All right, and Jonathan, do you use common ML frameworks like TensorFlow or Write? So it's really a combination of both, but we do have clinical practitioners who do use the common frameworks like TensorFlow, Caffe, MXNet, and so on. But for the ease of people who are already in this space, there are particular software development tools, like the Broad Institute has the GATK, the Genome Analysis Toolkit, and there are several add-on packages that you can apply machine learning models to that already. A lot of them are based on TensorFlow, but in some instances, we have various other companies that have put together their own sort of machine learning packages for pharmaceutical drug discovery processes. And one particular one that we use quite extensively is called BioBuilds. It's completely open source. It incorporates all of the popular either genomics and the machine learning toolkits, and combines in an easy to install format. And that's what we use even on our systems that we sell for drug discovery.
There's another, I think, question from Daniel Yobet.
Yes, so I see that. So if I do, say, discover a drug in silico and proceed with in vitro studies, I give results. How does one proceed if your milieu is a university-funded lab? Well, typically, unfortunately, this is where a lot of the smaller companies have run into issues, because when it comes to phase 1 or any of the clinical trials, you have to work with a larger pharmaceutical company which has the resource in order to do this. Now, because the requirements and the safety requirements and the assessment requirements are so rigorous and even in some cases onerous, it's usually the very large drug companies which have the resources to do that. Again, you have to recruit volunteers in each one of those human trials, and you have to make sure that you're not, intentionally introducing some other problem that you had not foreseen. And a lot of the times, people are compensated. So again, it's believe it or not, that is a complicated process that we haven't. And it generally takes a long time just because it is a complicated process, and there's no way to speed it up. In fact, if you see a lot of the agony around the COVID-19 vaccines is that it has to pass, the phase 3 trials, and the phase 3 trials is you have to administer the drug to at least 1,000 people. Then you have to study the side effects of the drug. So there's a lot of statistical analysis that happens post-study. And sometimes those interactions with the drug don't happen right away. They take several weeks, several months, in some cases even several years. So that's why drug companies end up being very, very careful in bringing a drug to market. And they do a lot of testing. In fact, endless amounts of testing. Even after you introduce a drug, you're still collecting data on how that drug is performing in the market space. And a lot of the times, you learn from those, the wider application in the population to see if it's introducing, effects that you had not even anticipated. Now, hopefully with machine learning, and as some of these, we get better animal models that that we can then test these compounds better and better. Hopefully that will reduce the time it does to do these clinical trials. Again, that is the goal, that is the hope. We're still not there. But to answer your question, yes, at that point, you'd either have to work with a company that has experience doing the clinical trials, and oftentimes that ends up being the large pharmaceutical companies. You're very welcome, Daniel. All right. Well, if we don't have any other questions, again, this was my pleasure. I apologize. I went a bit long, and I would have liked to spend a lot more time on the science and the various techniques. Hopefully next year when I'm there in person, I'll be able to do that and have some more productive conversations with all of you. But thank you so much. I hope you all have a great rest of the conference, and I will talk to you soon. All right. All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. As everyone can see in the chat, the next section is at 3:45, because the session that was planned at 3:15 by Microsoft has been cancelled.
virtual conference, and we are certainly interested in participating in the future, and hopefully seeing you all in person someday soon. So what I'd like to start here is really our focus. Our focus from an AMD perspective is about high-performance computing solutions across all the markets that we serve, and this spans from the supercomputing centers all the way to the client devices. It's our corporate belief that if we succeed in the highest performing segments of the market, that we can then leverage that technology into the other markets that we serve. And as you've seen from AMD's financial results and AMD's position now in the industry, that strategy is working out, that strategy is paying off. So it is certainly an exciting time to be here. It's an exciting time to be a part of AMD. And I am certainly glad to be here. It's been 2 years for me in the industry, or at least in this part of my career. So we certainly have exciting times ahead, and our focus again is high performance computing solutions for all the markets that we serve. Now, specifically into the data center, which is where most of the audience here today would concern themselves with, we have 3 pillars of growth, and all 3 are growing well. So the first 2, supercomputing and cloud, were the 2 pillars that grew the fastest, the earliest, after the introduction of AMD's EPYC processor family back in 2017. The reason for this early adoption is that those 2 verticals both have more resources to adopt earlier. They also have a bound technical problem. And by that, I mean the workloads from a supercomputing center are typically known. In the cloud, the cloud partners there typically have large engineering staffs, and they maintain their own operating systems in many cases. And so as a result of that, porting those operating systems, moving them onto new platforms is a burden that they can bear. In the enterprise, it's different. In the enterprise, you're working with an entire universe of partners, thousands, if not millions of customers who all have their own different styles of IT and different applications and heritages and operating systems and all of these things. And so in the enterprise space, it takes longer to get the operating systems qualified. It takes longer to get new hardware supported. It takes longer to get the applications certified on top of that. But in all 3, we're doing extremely well. So in the supercomputing space, we have significant wins. And the first exascale systems to be deployed in, at least in America, will likely be AMD-based systems. In the cloud space, we have over 150 instances available, public instances. We also have significant presence in the internal properties of those companies. And then in the enterprise, we have today more platforms available for AMD EPYC than we had for AMD Opteron 20 or 15 years ago. And if you think about that, in the Opteron days, we got to about 25% market share. In EPYC, we're now in double-digit share as of the second quarter of this year and growing quickly. But the fact is that we now have a broader base from which to grow. We have more platforms to support. One last comment on this chart that needs to be understood is that the cloud market itself represents about 50% of the processors sold into servers. And so remember that, think about that when you think about our motivations in terms of designing processors and designing products going forward. That's a market that we simply have to serve, and that was the initial design target for the EPYC processors when they were released. So the first of the 2 exascale systems I'll profile here, this is Frontier for Oak Ridge National Laboratory in the United States as part of the Department of Energy. We expect this to have 1.5 exaflops. So this was the first big exaflop system based on AMD that was launched, or that was announced, and we expected to be delivering our components for this at the end of 2021. Next up is El Capitan. It's a similar style system, and it's a similar customer. So this is also the Department of Energy. It's a different lab, Lawrence Livermore National Labs, and our AMD shipments here will be in 2022, and this system is expected to have 2 exaflops available. And so this is really where we are. We're in this exaflop world, and from an AMD perspective, this is exciting. And so for the rest of the presentation, what I'll describe to you is actually the processors that we're using in this, but also, and maybe more extensively, the graphics cards, which are really providing much of the floating point operations that these systems rely on in order to break the exascale barrier. So the processor is the 2nd generation EPYC. And I think a lot of you have seen this before. This is Rome was the code name. It is the highest performing x86 processor in the industry. So it goes up to 64 cores. When it was launched, it had twice the performance at half the cost of the competition, generating a better cost of ownership. We also innovated from a security perspective in that we encrypt the memory fully with encryption engines that are inside of the memory controllers. And we have the opportunity to encrypt it with a variety of keys. Therefore, each virtual machine running on one of these processors has the option to encrypt its memory with its own key. And so this is an exciting and interesting time. And this concept of encrypting memory along the virtual machine boundaries appears to have been taking hold. We've seen this adopted in VMware. We've seen it adopted in Google for confidential compute. And we also see proposed instructions and proposed features from our competitors which do the same thing. So we feel like we've actually set the standard here and advanced the industry forward by making data encryption while in use something that's possible and something that's accessible to the customers around the world. As you would expect from a processor with so many cores, with so much memory, with so many I/O lanes, you would expect us to have the benchmark and the #1 scores across the industry and across the markets that we serve. And you can see that we do. So really, almost any workload that's run on EPYC generates a world record. We've got at least 170 world records independently published with the independent specifications or benchmarking agencies. So it's an exciting and an interesting time, of course, to be here. And again, I'll just go back to the point that this was really designed for the cloud computing customers, but because it has more cores, it works well for software-defined infrastructure. It works well for big data and analytics. It works well for machine intelligence, and it works well for high-performance computing. And so basically by putting in all of these features, by delivering on the promise of the new manufacturing techniques, AMD is able to make tremendous progress in delivering performance to the market. So from a specification or from a how these processors are built, certainly here with this slide in the at-a-glance bit, we are doing multi-chip modules for these processors, and that was a departure from the standard practice. But the reason why is that this helps us in terms of delivering these features and functions at a lower cost, and I'll explain that in a later slide. But just here, what you can see is that you have in the 64-core model 8 chiplets, which are the core dies, and then you have the I/O die in the middle, which includes all the memory controllers, the I/O controllers, the secure processor, as well as the internal management of the part that manages to the specifications and the environmental specifications of the socket. So you can see there from a compute perspective what we have up to 64 cores and the memory, 8 channels. Performance is significantly improved over what went before. And from an I/O perspective, we have a significant amount of I/O lanes. This has allowed our entrance really into the telecom space and the telecom market. And so for us, these new adjacencies are coming online. And as we increase our market share in the x86 market generally, or in the processor market generally, we should expect to see more and more industry-style workload discussions and more industries adopting EPYC as we go forward. And from the security perspective, I mentioned that before. The key to success in this is really the manufacturing process where we're doing multi-chip modules instead of the monolithic design. This is good for a couple of reasons. First of all is cost. So semiconductors are fundamentally a real estate game, and as a result of that real estate game, the smaller the die, the better the yield, the more wafer that you can use, therefore the lower your cost. And so by cutting up the die into a bunch of small dies, by cutting up the processor into a bunch of smaller dies, we're actually saving cost because we're in a better point on the yield curve. Furthermore, this allows us to mix and match process technologies where they are fit in order to bring forward technological innovation that allows us to bring the 7-nanometer process to the x86 world first. So this is the first time in our history that AMD has been ahead of its primary competitor in process technology in terms of products that are shipping. And this is an important milestone. And furthermore, based on the way that the industry is structured now, where we're a disaggregated industry instead of a vertically integrated one, based on that structure, what we believe going forward is that while we may not always be as far ahead as we are today, we'll never be as far behind as we once were. Now, from a design perspective, the other thing this does is this modular design allows us tremendous flexibility in terms of the markets that we serve. So we are the challenger, we are the smaller company, therefore we need to find creative ways in order to leverage our technology across the markets that we serve. And we can even do this physically. So some of these core dies can actually go directly into workstation parts or directly into desktop parts. The other thing this does is it allows us to mix and match the I/O standards so that we don't have to guess right on every single thing to do a traditional monolithic design. We don't have to guess on the right memory speeds, PCI speeds, number of cores, types of cores, all of those things. We can mix and match and actually create products that fit the market much faster than we could if we had to guess the state of the market 3 years before. So it's an interesting innovation, and it is fundamentally the reason behind the resurgence of AMD is, how this type of modular design, this type of modular approach, bringing this type of packaging and bringing this type of innovation to the industry for your benefit. So this is the data center CPU roadmap, and you can see the Zens, so Zen 2, Zen 3, Zen 4. Now, this is the core cadence, and we've already launched Zen 3 on the consumer side, so we'll be launching Zen 3 on the server side in the next year. So we'll start to ship Milan parts at the end of this year to some of the key customers. But next year we'll be launching this in the general market with OEM availability. So it's certainly exciting times, and you can see Genoa coming along later. Now, we have, and AMD has executed its roadmap and been true to its roadmap for quite some time, and we do not see that slowing down anytime soon. Now, our vision for the supercomputing space is to combine our CPU and our GPU technology. So I've spoken about CPU here, but it's important to remember that AMD actually is not only Intel's primary competitor in CPUs, we're also NVIDIA's primary competitor in GPUs. And it is our view that the combination of those two strengths delivered in an open model where the programming is accessible to the users and fitting into an ecosystem is the way to get this performance, and the way to get this performance actually available and usable for the industry. And to that effect, we have a new product that we have recently launched in order to tackle this challenge. So the rest of the presentation will really go through that. Now, this slide is something that I showed in the industry crossfire just earlier yesterday. And the reason why I wanted to show this here is because one of the ways to describe AMD is to follow the Infinity Fabric. So internal to the EPYC processor, internal to that multi-chip module, the cache coherent bus is what we also call the Infinity Fabric. So that is the global memory interconnect, and that's the cache coherent bus that connects all the chips together. An external version of that same fabric is also what we use to connect the CPUs together in a dual socket configuration. Furthermore, the same fabric is also used to connect the GPUs together into a hive. So we have cache coherent in the processor, between the processors, and then between the GPUs. Now, what is the next step? How do we create cache coherency between different types of processors? And that's, of course, what we're working on, and that's the idea, the promise behind Frontier and El Capitan and these new systems which are coming forward to break the exaflop barrier, is to creatively connect these together so that we're able to easily use and easily program and easily deliver the performance that's needed in order to be at the exaflop era. And so this is an important thing, and this really describes how you can sort of see what AMD is doing. We are expanding this cache coherency across the products and across the markets that we serve, and by doing so, we believe we're generating a significant benefit for the market, for the users, and setting a standard that is pushing the industry towards greater and greater heights. Now, from a GPU architecture perspective, you can see the different acronyms on here. So the graphics, it's called Graphics Compute Now, but this GCN architecture here, this is what the MI50 is based on. You see we now have CDNA and CDNA2 coming. So what CDNA is it's a compute-specific architecture for GPUs. So GCN, the first one on this chart, the MI50, this is the last card that we have that actually, from a compute perspective, has a professional graphics equivalent. So for example, if you wish to use our software stack and if you wish to use GPUs for compute and you have a workstation, you can today buy a Radeon 7 Pro and actually use that just like you would use an MI50, because it's the same base hardware. The fundamental difference is that the Radeon 7 Pro has graphics connectors and output connectors, and the MI50 doesn't. Going forward, that's not the case. Going forward, we're bifurcating these architectures. The graphics side is called RDNA. The compute side is called CDNA. And the MI100 is the first example of CDNA architecture. We actually have also launched RDNA architecture recently when you've seen the Radeon, the recent Radeon announcements. So it's an exciting thing here to actually do this, but just remember that these products are now bifurcating, and this era is changing. So it's no longer take a graphics card, use it for compute. We're now creating more and more specialized cards for these markets. And then as we go forward, MI Next will build upon this to generate even more performance in the compute segment. Now, why are we doing this? So the reason why we're doing this is we're trying to bend the curve, right? We've all spent the last year hoping to flatten curves and bend curves and study curves, and we've all become at least amateur mathematicians with regards to the opportunity to study exponential growth and decay as we've seen the pandemic rage across the world. Now, here, what we're trying to do is we're trying to bend the curve upwards. We're trying to bend the curve forward in terms of GPU accelerated exascale. And that's our mission here in order to do this. And so what we see is that we see the performance of general purpose GPUs actually flattening out. And so with our new product, we want to do is we want to improve that. We want to bend that curve again forward. We want to go up and to the right. And that's what the MI100 is all about. Now, this is the MI100. You can see here it's in a PCI card form factor. We are breaking the 10 teraflop barrier. In fact, we're getting to 11.5 teraflops here in double precision. And that's certainly exciting. It's an amazing thing to think of, one card with 10 teraflops. Of course, the MI50 had one card with 4 teraflops, so there was still, significant performance there. And you can see some of the other stats about faster matrix math and about better AI performance in terms of mixed precision and also half precision. So for us, this is really our entrance into this space. This is certainly a product that's generated a lot of buzz and a lot of excitement within and without. It was just recently launched at the Supercomputing Show. Now, just to put things in perspective, and for me, this is my own perspective on the industry because of where I came from and where I am now. So I left the semiconductor industry in 2000, and I rejoined the semiconductor industry in 2019. So in between, I had a long career in the systems space. And in that time, apparently, we've gone from a 10 teraflop supercomputer was the best you could do with 2000 to a 10 teraflop card is what we can deliver now. And that's an exciting thing, delivered and driven by the advancements largely in the semiconductor industry in order to provide the opportunity to do this. And it just puts things in perspective about how much the world has really changed in terms of the capabilities that we have from these products. Now, this is powered by our new architecture here, and you can see what we've done is we've really doubled up on the compute density here. That's the main, really the main story. We've doubled up on that. We've provided some additional matrix instructions in order to accelerate the HPC and AI workloads, and we still have a faster interconnect. So this faster GPU to GPU performance with our Infinity architecture is actually faster than PCI Gen 4, which itself is a lot faster than PCI Gen 3. So we're stacking innovation and on top of innovation and stacking performance on top of performance. We also have high bandwidth memory in order to generate enough memory throughput to feed this compute engine so that we can deliver the performance that we want and deliver the performance that our customers need. Now, the workloads, as you know, inside of HPC are diversifying, and so for us, it's important to pick our spots. And our spots here, the sweet spot for this product is really the single and double precision workloads. So specifically single precision, and this is where we talk about university and research institutions in terms of some of the molecular dynamics workloads. We also talk a lot about the oil industry and the reverse time migration workloads as well. Other workloads are really good. So we provide competition and we provide performance across all of these workloads. In some areas, we have the absolute performance leadership. In other areas, we have competitive price performance opportunities here. So really what we're doing is providing alternatives, providing options, and helping the users shape the market. So remember that you all essentially get the market that you buy. And if you don't look at alternatives, you could often get stuck. And so we are providing those kind of alternatives to the market now. And what we're able to do here, and this is just starting at Oak Ridge, this first exaflop system, you can see NAMD, Chala, pick on GPU, and guess. And you can see the numbers there in terms of the speed and the, how they've been able to be ported, and also the resulting performance gains that you can see for all of these applications. And this is typical. This is just building on a typical story here that we're now able to take CUDA codes. We're now able to take codes written in a language not for our GPUs, and we're able to transform those into applications that run on AMD GPUs with a relatively light lift, and that for us is important. So we're using a translation language called the Heterogeneous Interface for Portability, HIP. We call it HIPifying a code. And basically, we take CUDA code, we do string replacements of CUDA to HIP, and then also we have other tools that allow us to take into account the differences in the GPUs. And then beyond that, there is some hand tuning required. Nonetheless, people get there, and they get there fairly quick. Now, ROCm here. So what is this? ROCm is our open source platform here. This is what we're using for GPU compute. It's available. It's on GitHub if you want to go get it. And we're supporting this and using this widely now. Now, what this is our software stack, and it's been a several-year effort in order to get this mature, but we are committed to being open. We're committed to being open in the industry here, and for us, that's a key thing. And so what we see here is we have this open API, for high-performance computing, unified tools, performance, and really our mission is to fit within the ecosystem here as much and as well as we can. So we are, of course, committed to the entire stack being open, and you can see that from tools, frameworks, libraries, and compiler and languages. And notice here we say CPU and GPU. So this talk here is about ROCm, which is our GPU side. In the CPU side, we have other tools called AOCC and AOCL. So AOCC is the C compiler and also the Fortran compiler, largely based on LLVM. And then the AOCL are our libraries, and they're our answer to some of the math libraries from our competitors in terms of optimizing those functions for AMD technology. Now you can see we introduce here ROCm 4.0. So this is our pre-exascale stack for high performance computing and machine learning. So this was announced at Supercomputing. And if you look at it over time, we've certainly filled in the boxes, right, to make them production ready. If you looked at this a year ago or 2 years ago, most of the boxes were not light blue. Now we are porting this stuff in a pretty straightforward way. So you can see hack and the other codes here in terms of how many days it took to port them, and also the codes on the bottom there. And so this is important, right? It's important to think about this because these are often complicated things, and we do get the impression from the market that it's difficult to port. Software is a mess. It's a tar baby. I don't want to touch it. All of those things. Well, by giving a framework for this portability, we are able to bring these codes onto AMD GPUs. We're able to give customers a way to maintain their codes that doesn't necessarily require picking a GPU first before they do it, and then compiling the result on both AMD and NVIDIA. And the lift here, it's not to say that it's easy, it's not to say that it's totally light, but it's certainly possible. And in some cases it is easy. In fact, in some cases it is fairly quick, and you can see the time estimates there for the codes that are on the screen. So an afternoon, a single day, 21 days, a couple of days. And I've seen it both shorter and longer, in terms of our own experience here, but we're getting better at it, and you should have more confidence in it because we're able to make progress here. So that's really where we are. I mean, this is a short talk of just 20, 25 minutes, and I'll take a few questions afterwards. But I want to leave you with this idea that heterogeneous computing is really here. I mean, this is what we are doing. This is what we're about. This is where we're going, and where we have demonstrated the opportunity and the possibility of creating exaflop systems by combining the two styles of processing in a way that makes the performance accessible to the user. And that for us is the key message here, is that through these technologies, we're really creating systems, and those systems are then delivering the kind of performance that we believe is needed to advance the industry and advance society as we go forward. So with that, that is our path to exascale here at AMD. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you. Again, I am very much looking forward to getting back down to South Africa and visiting with you all, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much, Matt, for giving us a very useful and informative presentation, and welcome to the session.
Thank you so much. So thank you for accommodating me. It was difficult for me to get here for the right time to start, but no, thank you for that. And I did see one question in the box regarding the process node and the lithography in terms of 7 nanometer to 5 nanometer. Our partner TSMC has roadmaps down to 3 and 2 nanometers. So the eternal question in the semiconductor industry is always, are we at the end? You know, are we at the end point here? And in my time around this space, that was true 20 years ago, it's true today. We are finding ways around these physical limits, you know, whether it's optical pattern correction or extreme lithography, it's moving, seems to be moving that way. So we're confident on the continued platform for innovation here.
Okay. Thank you for answering the question. I think based on the information that I have now, there is another question that just came in now. It is asking the following. I like the strategy of optimizing on higher level, PyTorch and TensorFlow API, as that is where developers are. However, no mention of OpenACC.
Yeah, I can't really comment on OpenACC, but you're right on the in terms of optimizing for the high level frameworks. I can provide that answer, I think, later. I need to go and check on it myself. But from the perspective of where we are, it's, you know, OpenMP is one area. You know, that's a way to offload. But really, TensorFlow and PyTorch is what we see as the dominant frameworks for machine learning and artificial intelligence. And for us to support that upstream, the questioner was right. I mean, basically that's where the developers are, and we need to be there. So we see the developers at CUDA for the coding of HPC applications. We see the developers at PyTorch and TensorFlow for the AI applications. And so we are building our software ecosystem in order to support that.
Okay, another question is, I remain curious about the CUDA compatibility question. How has it uptake been from commercial simulation software vendors who currently offer CUDA visions only?
We're still in our in the early days in that, and that actually it mirrors what's going on in the processors as well. So in the processor side, we have our our AOCL library, which is our competitor to Intel's MKL. And we're having the same discussions with those vendors as well about incorporating the AMD versions when their target for compilation and when their target for the application is an AMD processor. We've seen some of that activity already from MATLAB, for example, but we're still in the early engagement of these types of commercial codes, at least on the HPC side. I will say this, though, we have a lot of experience with it, especially in the gaming side. So if you bring in the other parts of AMD, we regularly launch new graphics cards with gaming titles and work with those developers to specifically take advantage of AMD features. So this is not something that's strange to us, but it's certainly a new market, and we don't have anything to announce currently as in being available, but we are working with those vendors to enable it.
Okay, great. We don't have any, I think, further questions, but I would like to ask a quick question, which might be controversial. Here at HPC, we have benchmarked various applications using the Intel and AMD processors, different types of AMD processors like 7402, 7302, and also the latest 7702, and including the Intel Xeon Platinum and the silver and the gold. And then I don't want to discuss the results here, but I would like to know what is your experience with regard to the performance of these two processors.
So with regards to the performance, what you should expect is you should expect some differences. So for example, on the the integer scores like SpecInt and SpecFP, you should expect us to be roughly core to core. So for example, the 32 core EPIC part, the 7452 in SpecInt is where we cross over the 28 core, the top end 28 core Intel in SpecInt and SpecFP. When you were running specific codes with AVX512, we don't have AVX512 in our processors. And so what this means is that our floating point bus is half as wide. And so for applications that really take advantage of that instruction, we have to go to higher core counts in order to maintain the lead. So for example, in high performance LINPACK, we get roughly 4 teraflops for the 7742. And the Intel number on 28 core parts isn't that far behind. It's above 3, I think, it's something like that. And if you look at it, we've got 128 cores to 56, but that's the difference that you have when you've got, a significant floating point component. Now, of course, the AVX512 slows the processor down, and there's other reasons for it. There's positives and negatives with it. But really, the application benchmarking that you should do, and the application benchmarking we strive to do, is independent. It also matters what compilations that you use. So whether you use AOCC and AOCL, or whether you use GCC or the Intel compiler or PGI or even the Cray compilers, those do make a difference at times, and those libraries can make a difference as well. But yeah, from a benchmarking perspective, the thing I would say that you should expect, as long as you're not doing as long as your code is not AVX512 heavy, core to core, we're okay. I mean, we're maybe not leading, but we're not that far behind. So you should expect a 24 core part to perform similarly to other 24 core parts, for example. But when you do have some of those special cases, yeah, the answers are different, and we certainly see benchmarks that show that.
Okay, thank you, Matt. I think this was a very interesting presentation, and then I hope that our audience have also enjoyed it. Unfortunately, we can't be able to give you a round of applause. We can only do it virtually.
Thank you all.
A round of applause, Yeah.
All right.
And with that, I think this is going to be the last presentation on this HPC technology session. And then the next session is going to be start at 4:30, which is going to be a keynote. So you need to log out and log into the keynote session. And with that, I would like to thank Matt and everyone who attended. And thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care and have a good conference.
Okay, cheers.
Cheers.